Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Way is in Training. This is a podcast exploring how warriors should train and fight, as well as how they should live. We will talk about technique, but we'll also dive deep into fitness, mindset, and strategy. We will explore leadership and philosophy as well. So whether you are a young soldier, a veteran police officer, a responsible armed citizen, or simply someone looking for an authentic life, let's examine how the lessons of combat and preparation for it can help us fulfill our potential. Let's explore the way together and learn how the discipline of training can show us our true selves amidst the chaos of life. Hey, everybody. On this episode, I've got my friend Paul Sharp, fellow retired Illinois police officer, martial artist extraordinaire, good shooter, and all-around legendary lawman. So why don't you go ahead and tell everybody about yourself a little bit, Paul? Oh, I left out powerlifter. I left out vegan powerlifter. So why don't you go ahead and tell everybody a little bit about yourself, Paul, and we'll get started.
Yeah, for sure. So, I had the opportunity to be a police officer for 22 years. That was an incredible experience. As you know, it just changes your perspective. You come in thinking you know how the world works and all that, and then you quickly realize, man, I just don't know as much as I thought I knew. And the story's never exactly as it appears. You know, you learn quickly there's 3 or maybe 6 sides to a story, and you just kind of, you learn quickly, right? You learn on the job training, right? So spent 22 years doing that, and in the process of that, became a trainer more in that area. Prior to that, I had been a martial artist my whole life. I started wrestling when I was 6, boxing when I was 10, and judo at the same time. We had judo at a little National Guard armory in Maryland where I grew up. And so to me, it looked like wrestling. Got into it, loved it, and dabbled in all kinds of martial arts coming up through the years. Mostly heavily influenced by I guess you would call it the Okinawan side of the martial arts, the Ishin-ryu and Wei-shi-ryu and that kind of stuff. And came up through that, normal upbringing, normal kid, and just loving the martial arts, loving the training more than anything, I think, and the feeling of just pushing yourself and doing stuff you didn't think you could do. That was really the biggest piece for me. And started in Maryland. That's where I grew up. Moved down to South Florida for about 8 years or so. And then when the market crashed, that was my introduction to law enforcement. A buddy of mine was like, hey, man, I'm going to go apply for a job as a firefighter and a police officer. They're hiring for both. So do you want me to get an application for you? I said, heck yeah, man, I'll try it. The police department called first. So kind of the joke, there of got in the wrong line. And but I loved it. It was a phenomenal experience. I had grown up in a family of law enforcement. And so my grandfather and my great uncle had both been sheriffs in the counties in the area where I grew up. And so I had grown up around it and had seen it and always had an interest, but never pursued it. And just always kind of thought, maybe that's not for me. And also you have people in your life that tell you, that's not something you want to do. You might not want to do that. You don't have the temperament for that. And so kind of shied away from it and then finally went for it. And when I went for it, I loved it. I loved everything about it. I loved the training. I loved the service to the community, feeling like you're part of something, trying to affect change in some way, trying to, bring, I think Paul Howe said it best one time where he said that sometimes we bring chaos and sometimes we bring order. It's whatever it takes to solve the problem. And so just being in a position where I was able to do that really affected me on a lot of levels and changed the way I think, changed the way I approached everything. And in the midst of that, I'd already been training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Kind of in the midst of that, I had the opportunity to meet Matt Thornton and the guys from Straight Blast Gym, which is a tiny organization at the time. And they were all guys that I knew from the Jeet Kune Do world, which I was already an instructor in that world. And I had reached the level of an apprentice instructor in Jeet Kune Do concepts with Dwight Woods and the guys at the Unified Martial Arts Academy in Miami, and then had met through a seminar, Paul Vunak, and become associated with him and training with those guys. And those guys were already going into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And so I met Conan Silve, who is part of American Top Team now, and a couple of those guys. And that was my initial introduction into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in around 1993 or 94. I can't really remember clearly when that started. It was definitely around the time of the second UFC. So that was when I started getting into that. And when I moved up to Illinois, that's when I got linked up with the Straight Blast Gym guys and started my own training group there. And that kind of, tied everything together, because that started my journey into, at the same time almost, my journey into the police defensive tactics world, because one of the SWAT team leaders, kind of a funny story, which if you imagine being on probation, like, you know what that's like. You're on probation. You're trying not to make any waves. You don't want anybody to know your name. Just do a good job and just get through the 2 years, right? Well, part of the Straight Blast Gym is that we pressure test everything. And a group of guys, including myself, we had gone to a park and we're stick fighting. And we're beating the crap out of each other. So you know where this is going. So the police get called. And we had a residency requirement, and so you have to live in the city. So I'm in the city where I work. The police get called. Thankfully, it was some squared away guys showed up, and one of them recognized me. And he said, "Hey, you're one of the new guys, right?" And I was like, "Oh man, here we go. I've messed up." And I said, "Yes." I said, we're just training. This is just like an element of training and testing what we do and making sure that we don't do anything that doesn't work. Only performance counts." And had a really good conversation with him. And 2 days later, the commander of the SWAT team found me and said, "Hey, I want you to come to training. We're going to use you as the defensive tactics guy." And I thought, I don't know anything about that world. I don't know anything about what you guys are going to require from me. And basically what it was I was their dummy all day, the crash test dummy. I was just, I was the guy they were like, "Listen, don't let them arrest you no matter what." I was like, "Okay, I don't know what that means," and then it was basically an all day long street fight, so that was, that was my introduction to defensive tactics. And they put me in for schools, and they sent me to shooting schools and defensive tactics schools, and started kind of grooming me towards the SWAT side of the house and the more tactical side. And then that was just the genesis of it all. That's what led me into that path of, not only do I be this uber police officer, this super cop that I would want coming to my family's help if they called 911, but also into the path of the guy who's training these guys and trying to establish this culture of training and, kind of your mantra of training is the way, and just making that the culture there in that department of just training is what solves everything. If we want to see what the truth is, let's get a timer out. Let's create a course. Let's run it and, run and gun it and compare times. And we want to see what works for defensive tactics for two officers trying to take down one highly uncooperative suspect, and let's test it. Let's have an uncooperative suspect, and let's have two guys, and let's, video and do the work, and then sit back and compare and look at it. And so that was kind of the genesis of that. And that led me through the next 20 years of my career. And then when I retired, by that point, I also the whole time had been running a gym. The whole time I'd had some form or version of a straight blast gym the whole time. So, kind of like you understand completely, working a shift and then running a gym and a
Yeah.
business. Yeah, exactly. So doing that for 20 years too, basically 20-hour days, and every day off and every vacation day is running this business, which was also training people. And that kind of continued up. And then once I retired and was off the job, I was able to just devote myself 100% to training. And so that's what has led me to where I am today. And now today, I'm head of programming, director of programming for Straight Blast Gym in Idaho. We have about 700, almost 800 members. And that's my day to day, man. It's just training all day and training other people and helping people, reach their goals. And in the middle, and kind of what you said too, like in the midst of all that, I've gone through like, trying veganism and carnivore and all these other things, competing in powerlifting, competing in strongman, and running ultras and competing in
Crushing Glock grips.
Yeah.
That's one of Les's favorite stories about you, by the way.
Yeah, that's funny.
So for those of you who don't know the inside joke, Paul induced a malfunction on a Glock by crushing the grip into the mag so hard the mag wouldn't feed, is at least how I heard the story.
Yeah, it caused some issues. And Les said, maybe you don't have to grip it that hard. I said, well, maybe it could be a steel gun. Maybe it should be a steel frame,
Yeah, maybe it should.
Yeah, but it was, I was during the powerlifting, when I was heavily into powerlifting, I had definitely increased my grip strength. And, but yeah, Les is an awesome, part of that story too. And, I was just talking with Les the other day. I know you did too. He was on your show on the podcast. I was just talking to Les the other day a little bit about like Calvin ball and just those kinds of things, just that constant challenging yourself constantly with what you can't do. And, finding those failure points, it's so important. And I had kind of fallen into a rut when I met Les of doing what I was good at, like doing the things that I'm great at because that's impressive and I can pull that off and still working some failure points here and there, but only doing it when nobody's around, and what's interesting is I was the opposite in the jiu-jitsu MMA side and even in the strongman powerlifting side. Like the day's coming where you're going to have to walk up on that platform and squat, bench, and deadlift in front of everybody watching. And you can't fake that. You can't hide that. So you have to work your weaknesses. But when it came to the shooting and things like that, I was very much in this rut of, I don't want to compete anymore because if I look bad, I'm the lead pistol guy for my department. If I look bad, they're not going to listen to me. If they see me have a bad run or they see me flub something, they're not going to listen to me. And Les is like, bro, that's a coward's way out and that's a slow death. You have to start putting yourself out there again. You have to start. And that was kind of my introduction to Calvin ball with Les at the old Alpha range, was just, we're going to keep doing what you suck at,
Yep. No, I love that drill. And I think it's so good on so many levels too, right? It's funny because I was just literally talking to Cecil Birch about Calvin ball. Like,
oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
But it's like, it's such a successful drill on so many levels because you work your weaknesses, but it's this element of random combination of basic skills.
Yes.
And that I think is a piece most people are missing in their training, whether you're talking about, combatives, martial arts, shooting, whatever. Like people drill technique and then they do the test, but they don't really work on, I know like all the terms, but like the sports psychologist term chunking, you know what I mean? Like building those chunks of skill and assembling them like Lego blocks.
Yes.
And I just think that's so important and so neglected.
Yes. Yeah. And as we're looking at, especially like, I've been reading a lot lately. A friend of mine is just he's a genius, literally. but he's heavily into researching coaching and the best methods for coaching, and how do we get people as good as possible, as quickly as possible. And while there are challenges, there's no real hack to the grind. They're just like, you know, right? Like if you told me the difference between where you are right now and being a GM is just you need to do 400 more reps per day of from the holster, 2-2-2-2, right? Get your first 4 out of the way and then out of the box as fast as possible, because that's where you're losing your time, is your transition out of the box to the next stage or next point of fire. There's no way to fake that. I'm going to have to just do that. I'm going to have to just dry fire the heck out of that piece right there over and over and over again until my brain bleeds, you know, and just do it. You know, there's no way around that. But there are some things that can speed up that process. And to your point of chunking and that kind of thing, there's a lot of work being done on like this predictive processing. And I don't know enough about it to speak to it. I've been reading as much as I can get my hands on, and all the links that my friend's sending me and the information he's sending me is like, read this, you know, every day, read this, you know, and trying to understand, because there's so much to that, which is it's I don't want to get woo about it, but it's almost like this explanation of intuition, which is you've seen something enough and you've studied it enough that you almost move before you're conscious of your movement. You know,
well, it's the subconscious processing piece rather than the conscious processing piece.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. So it's happening in a cognitive level where, and as my friend put it the other day, we might not understand it in our lifetime. So the person that's going to be able to explain this might not have been born yet, because it's just so incredible. Our mind is such an incredible piece of equipment. But what's interesting in the study of it is we're starting to realize that the more looks you get, the more things you haven't seen before. If you can put yourself in a position where you see things you haven't seen before and figure out how to make these pieces, the invariant. So from a shooting perspective, you know, how do I index the pistol onto a target and address that array or that person if it's a self-defense thing? The more times I can see that in different contexts that aren't the same, the more exposures I have to solving the problem with these basic pieces that will always solve the problem, the better I'm going to be at just moving without thought. At just, yeah. And so, and man, it's fascinating. It is really, it's mind-blowing. It really is, but it's also just, it's really cool. Like, it just lets you know it's limitless.
Well, and if you think about it, like all the best fighters I've ever known seem to almost have like almost a precognition of what you were going to do.
Yeah, exactly. Right. You know? Like they know, they just step and I used to think it was, and to some degree it's a conscious track, right? They know if I do this, you're going to do this. So or they see you do something. And like a great example is, you know, my brother, sparring with my brother is miserable. He's a great boxer and he's just, you know, he's a little shorter than me. So he's underneath of me already. So it's hard to get that where my eye line is even.
Oh, and he's got such heavy hands too.
Yeah. And he hits so hard, you know, and there's just I remember sparring him and just getting really frustrated, just like almost like stop, punch me in the face, frustration, you know? And I was getting ready for a fight. And I finally said to him, I'm like, man, every time I move, you punch me in the face, you know? And he goes, because you move the same way every time. And I was like, what do you mean? And he's like, your hands are here. You go 1, 2, and then you throw. Or you'll go 1, 2, throw. So you pull your hand down just a little bit. So this first time you pull your hand down, I start to throw my punch, and it's just in time for the second. And I'm getting you every time. And so there are those where they see it and they recognize it and they consciously choose, like, I'm just going to wait. Bam. You know, kind of like an ambush. But then, like you're saying, is the part that's really fascinating, where it's like, I've talked to fighters too that were like, I don't know. I just knew.
Yeah, I just knew.
You do that. and it's like, well, how though? Because there's got to be an explanation, like, how did you know? And when you talk to them further, or you talk to them about their training. So one of the things I get to do is I do ringside commentation for Front Street Fights, it's a regional event here. It's probably like 6,000 to 10,000 people come out and watch the show, and I do ringside commentary, and then I go in or cage side commentary rather, and then I go in and interview them post fight. And sometimes we will do post fight interviews like in the locker room, just like a more in depth. And it's interesting when I talk to those guys, they'll say things like, this camp, I had just 20 different training partners come in. I had guys that I don't normally train with come in, and it really helped up my game. And when you think about it, you think, well, how wouldn't that confuse your game? Because if you're trying to build a strategy, say I'm going to fight a southpaw he's got a wicked leg kick and pretty decent takedown, and he fights well off the cage. I want a bunch of southpaws that do that, Well, the other side of that is, what if I just have a bunch of different looks, a bunch of different fighters each week, or every couple of weeks, I get a bunch of different guys come in to spar with me, so that there's nothing I haven't seen. And so when we go in there, we touch up and we start to throw. Anything he does right now, I have seen 200 versions of before I've seen him. So I've faced 200 training partners in the last 12 weeks to get ready for this fight. There's nothing he's going to do that these guys haven't shown me already. So that's
cool. That's really cool. That seems to kind of, the concept interleaving training, right?
Yeah. But
like that's actually like part of the way I would do Calvin ball with Les, is like we do a couple of rounds of Calvin ball, then throw a couple Bill drills, then do a couple rounds of Calvin ball, then do a couple Blake drills, like just kind of mix it all together. And I've read a lot of stuff on that. And it's like, that's how like kids learn athletic skills, right? The kind of element of like random play.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if there's not some kind of tie-in with the way the brain works that makes interleaving training better for technical development with what you're talking about. You see what I mean? Like, because you're getting this variety of looks at a certain thing, and you're kind of learning to attack similar problems from a variety of angles.
Right. Because there's only so many ways the body's going to move. There's only so many ways. So what I need is to see those ways in different planes or in different looks. I just need different exposures. And so each one's going to change me a little bit. And to the point of games and kids, you've read Range by Epstein?
Yeah.
Yeah, right? So that is a great book about just that general approach to sport of making it all a game. Today we're going to do some soccer. Tomorrow we're going to do some gymnastics, or maybe today we'll do some baseball, and just having this general growth approach with
like
kids.
They figured out the best athletes aren't usually the prodigies that did one sport from childhood. They're usually the ones that were multi-sport players until they decided to focus on one thing.
Yeah.
And that's got to have some kind of tie-in there, right? Like it's got to have some kind of.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I'm looking at now with when I train people. So over like the last maybe 10 years or so, that's kind of been my approach to training people, where we have a focus, but so we'll have a focus for the month that for the general classes, and say like this month it's been mount because it's jiu-jitsu. So this month it's been mount. In judo, it's been Sainagi. So that's been kind of their focus, but it's from all these different angles and all these games that are general, that play into, that create these channels that guide people into discovering, well, how do I hit Sainagi versus drop Sainagi? Like, what's the decision point? Or what opponent, what body type feeds into that best? And by creating these games and letting people play and have fun, and some of the games don't even really represent that skill, but it represents the match. It represents what randori would look like for the judo guys, or a match would look like for the jiu-jitsu guys. How do we get them to playfully problem solve until they eliminate enough of the things that don't work and they discover what does. Which kind of back to what you were saying, like, what are those pieces that always work no matter what? And how do we get people to kind of not, I guess, refine the game? I've been thinking a lot about elimination, right? I've been thinking about two things a lot, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, which is examination leads to elimination, right? So I've been thinking about that a lot, and I don't know where that came from.
But that was like Bruce Lee's big thing, right? Like, just keep hacking away, keep
hacking away the
simplifying.
unintentionals, right? Like knock away the innocent. So I've been thinking a lot about that because I've been thinking about how do I get students to understand, like, the goal for me. I've been a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu since 2015. I've been a black belt in Judo since about the same time, like 2014. So it's like, and you know this because you're a black belt in multiple disciplines. You get to black belt level and people think you've got it. But what really starts happening, yeah, right? What really starts happening is it all starts coming together.
Yeah.
And then like 3 or 4 years in, then you're like, oh, that's what that meant. And so I'm trying to figure out ways to take my students and the people that trust me to train them. How do I start them where I am, at least conceptually? Like, they might not physically be able to do it, but at least conceptually understand the art and the application of the art where I'm at right now. So, because that's how the art advances, right? If we think about the example I like to use is guitar playing. If we look at guitar players in the context of rock and roll, so you had like Buddy Holly, Chuck Berry, Carl Perkins. You had these early kind of rockabilly, kind of that mix of country and rock, and those guys, and they were playing some really cool stuff. And then you had like Muddy Waters and those guys just playing their stuff where people were like, oh, they made a deal with the devil to play that.
Yeah,
good.
Robert Johnson at the Crossroads.
Yeah, right. And so you had these guys, but you had Jimmy Page and Eric Clapton and Jeff Beck and Jimi Hendrix. You had that group of guys who were probably 13, 14, 15 years old, learning guitar, but they're starting out where these guys over here are kind of peaking. These guys are like at kind of the height of their career and their playing ability. These guys are starting to learn, but they're learning by listening to what these guys have already created and come up with at their best. So then you have Hendrix and all these guys, and then they kind of come into the spotlight in their early 20s, and they're playing some incredible stuff into, their 20s, and if they made it to their 30s, because the 60s and the 70s, but they made, but you have Eddie Van Halen, and you have all these this next generation of guitar players. You have like Steve Vai and those guys who are listening and going, oh, wait. And then Eddie Van Halen comes out with Eruption, and he lands on the scene, and people are like, where did this come from? How did this guy come up with this? Well, he started here because that's where these guys left off. So that was his starting. And now you got these guys playing like 8-string guitars. I went to see a band last year. These guys are playing 8-string guitars. The bass players playing this crazy 7. It was incredible. And it's like, who would have ever thought, if you were to be able to bring like Carl Perkins or one of those guys now and plop them on stage next to those guys, and no disrespect, but they probably wouldn't know what they're looking at or what they're hearing, And so,
like, I didn't mean to cut you off, brother. Sorry, but like, think about it like the shooting side, like Jeff Cooper, right? I mean, Cooper revolutionized everything.
Yeah.
But if you put Christian Seiler next to Jeff Cooper and had him shoot a stage, it wouldn't even be the same activity. Like, it's so far advanced.
Yeah, so far gone. So far, yeah. But just incredible, right? And so that's what I always think about, is that kind of stuff. As great as, we've talked about Jerry Barnhart before. As great as Barnhart is, and the guys from Barnhart Performance, as phenomenal as they are, and not to take anything from them, but somewhere, even like in our local clubs, you'll see somewhere some 14-year-old kid who is starting off kind of where those guys were kind of getting to at the end of their career, which is how it's supposed to be. It's not disrespectful to say that. It's how it's supposed to be.
They still, people wouldn't be where they are today if they didn't have that base that they built to build on.
Yeah, right.
But I will say that if I ever want to make myself feel good after a really bad match, I'll go on YouTube and watch like Dipsic World Shoot from like 1988.
Yeah, I'm like, how are they holding those like big optics on? Like, is that duct tape?
But just because it's, the skills evolved so much since then. It's like,
yeah, that's the skills and the gear and the whole training, right? Like everything that's being driven is just evolved so much. And so when I am training people now, I'm trying to think of games. I'm trying to think of ways to give my students everything I know now conceptually, my understanding of the game. And even if it doesn't click for them, because there's things that Chris Howder said to me and other people that they said to me when I was in my purple belt, brown belt phase that did not click until I just had something click. Chris Howder said to me when I was a brown belt, he said, you have to create pivot points and everything else works out from there. And so say a grip on a gi. So you get your grip, you get your right hand, you get my collar grip, right? We're doing judo, you get my collar grip. And there's two ways to approach it. I can try to break your grip, or I can use that to create a pivot point where I work around. And now you're attached to me, but you can't, right? You're stuck with me now. So I can take you where I want to go. And Chris said that to me when I was a brown belt. And it literally just clicked for me about 6 months ago during a judo training session where I was like, that's what he meant. That's what he meant. We are like, if there was no gravity, we're fighting in space, 0G environment, 360 environment. There's no up, no down. There's just our relationship to each other and who gets thrown into this immovable object first. Why would I ever want to break your grip? I've got you now. You got me, but I got you. And it clicked. And so I know there's going to be things that they aren't going to understand until they experience it or they experience enough of it. But the goal now is, how do I give them that conceptual starting point of where they're going to start as a white belt and a blue belt, where I'm at now at 30 years or so into this game of jiu-jitsu, MMA, all of this stuff. How do I hand that to them? And so I've been thinking a lot about that. That's been just dominating my thoughts when I coach, when I create games to teach points, to lead them into those paths where they're going to discover the understanding and the concepts, man.
That's really cool. Like, you get all my gears are turning now. You got me thinking about so many things just because of this,
Yeah. And I've been thinking a lot about, that whole like examination with the purpose of elimination, like examining things and then not for the purpose of adding, but for the purpose of eliminating. So eliminate the things that aren't in alignment, eliminate the things that don't, like, think about the drawstroke. If I can, and I remember, I think you trained with Ron Avery, right? Did you do his law enforcement
I
class?
never got to train with Ron Avery. I always wanted to, but unfortunately he passed before I had a chance. Like, I've got his books. I've read his books.
Oh, yeah. Brilliant, man.
Yeah.
Awesome, dude. I did his law enforcement class. And there was a place in the class where he would talk about, like, just getting the pistol high enough to clear the holster. Like, you don't need to be, once it clears the holster, it needs to be moving towards the target and not up and then, kind of, just refining movement, right? Just refining movement. And I remember him talking about that you'll find speed by eliminating movement. You'll find speed by reducing the number of movements and making it, if there is a way to make it one, then that would be great. And I remember him talking about, like, if it just eventually, instead of being 1, 2, 3, it's just one, and thinking about that and how do I apply that to everything I do, how do I apply that to how I coach? How do I get my students to think that way? How, it's just, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, because it's been, even to, man, this sounds kind of bad, but even to relationships and conversations and things like that, it's been like, let me examine this for a moment and think, does this need to be eliminated? Do I need to have this conversation? Do I need to have
or what parts of this conversation serve the purpose of the conversation, and what parts are counterproductive,
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't have to be about, do I need to talk to this guy? It could be about, how do I talk to this guy to get what we're trying to accomplished with the minimum amount of effort and wasted time.
Right. Yeah, because then it's more energy towards the thing that we're trying to solve, right? It's more energy towards whatever it is we're trying to work towards, and which also kind of, speaks back to what we started talking about, which is the exposures. I need the exposures of the actual thing. I don't need other things that are not the problem. I need to see the problem over and over and over again so I can solve it.
Yeah, and I really like everything we're talking about is really cool, but I really like that idea of the multiple exposures, because I'm thinking about, like, I'll use as an example, right? Like, when I started out in traditional karate, like way back when I was a teenager, there was this guy named Johnny Kaluta, who was a pastry chef of all things, and was just a badass. Like, this guy was just a tough individual, right? Even if he cooked cakes and pastries for a living.
You gotta be.
He had, the broken boxer's nose and cauliflower ears from wrestling, and big heavy hands. Yeah.
That's the best.
But he could also cook up a mean souffle, let me tell you. But no, great guy. And he was older than me. He was like, in his late 20s, maybe even early 30s, and I was a teenager. And it would make me so crazy back then, because my technique was better than his. And at the time, that's what I thought the key to everything was, form drove function. You know what I mean?
The answer, right? Yeah.
Yeah. It's not the answer, but that's what I thought at the time. You got to have a good enough technique, but then it's about how you use it,
Yes.
So every time, and he didn't even really compete anymore. Like, we had the All South tournament every year in New Orleans, and he would literally train for 2 weeks before the tournament and not any other time during the year, and win. Yeah. Like, he just didn't even train much. And he actually eventually, when I came back from the Army for a visit, like years later, he told me that he had stopped even training for the tournament because it just made him sore. He just showed up and won.
That's awesome.
But like, and how like Shotokan is, like, it's very like technical driven. Like, it's, the technique has to look a certain way. And like I said, they think that at least the culture.
They're looking at nice, clean lines.
And his technique was not that. He looked more like a Kyokushinkai guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I just couldn't touch him. Like, I was younger, I was faster, I was stronger, I had better technique, and I could not touch this guy. Like, not at all.
Yeah.
And I came to the conclusion years later that the reason was that he could read everything everybody did so well that he would just be where he needed to be without having to move particularly fast.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah. That was his strength, and his other strength was changing lines. He would start out a technique on one line, and because he wasn't wedded to like that clean, perfect traditional technique like the rest of us were, he'd change the line mid-technique and just catch you napping every time.
Nice. Yeah. And there's a thing. No, go ahead.
But like, what I'm thinking is, I think this ties into what you're talking about, because he started when he was a little kid. And, back then, karate wasn't a little kid's thing.
No.
And he and I both started as kids. And I think he just had so many looks when he was getting his little butt kicked by all the adults for decades that he figured it out,
Yeah, he figured it out. And there's a thing too where we talk about in coaching that effectiveness precedes efficiency. So it's going to look sloppy, it's going to look ugly, but it's going to be effective. And then over time it becomes refined, because then we learn to smooth it out and make it work. But we have to accept a little bit of slop. We have to accept that it's going to be effective before it's efficient. And and that's the thing.
Absolutely. And I wish I'd realized that when I was a teenager doing martial arts, because it would have been an easier progression for me.
Yeah. And the other thing to that too is then that means there has to be abundance, meaning I have to spam it. I have to be willing to just keep throwing it and keep learning to see. And I had a conversation with a striker. His name's Matt May, and he's one of my black belts in jiu-jitsu now, but he has like 80 plus MMA fights, and he doesn't know how many Muay Thai fights he's had. He has no idea. He's kind of a legend in this area for that stuff. But I had a conversation with him one time about hooks, like throwing the hook. Like, how do you set? Because I'll watch him spar, and he just effortlessly cracks people with a hook, which to me is mind-boggling because I have to set it up. I can't lead with a hook. I'm not Roy Jones Jr. I can't just see an opening and hit somebody with it. I have to figure out how to set it up. And so we had this conversation, and he said, I don't really think about whether it's a hook or a cross, or I just see an opening and I hit them.
Oh, I like that. I like that a lot. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So
I like that a lot.
That takes the pressure off of like, well, is my elbow, my elbow starts at my body, it comes up and drops a hand in. That's a hook. But if I take that away and I just say, how do I hit that side of them if this hand comes down? How do I get my hand into that opening? How do I make a hit there? And then just span it. And so that's what I started doing. I just started throwing it, and I paid for it. Like I paid for it. But over time, I started landing it. And it didn't look good. It wasn't great, but it was effective. It was starting to connect, and it was starting to make people have to react and move in a way they didn't want to move to deal with that pressure. And so, I think there's something to that, where in our pursuit for perfection, in our pursuit for things to look exactly the same every time, we lose sight of the fact that it's not going to be the same every time.
Sure.
Even our draw stroke, if our as isolated as that could be, it's not going to be the same every time. No. If we video it, like if I have to start my hands on the X's and then I have to move there, my draw stroke is not at all what it looks like when I'm standing in my practice room, just, slaying dry paper.
And I think this ties into something else cool too. Like take the draw stroke. Because I just thought of this, a little light bulb just went on, right?
Yeah.
So it's not just about the differences in technique that come from different start positions or different movements or different desired ending positions or, in states to your technique, right?
Yeah.
But think about all those times, because I don't care how good you are and how many draws you've done, you're going to get a certain percentage where the grip is a little bit off.
Yeah.
Where it's just a little bit wrong, right?
Right.
Do you have enough looks to fix that in mid-technique?
Yes. And and who talks about that is Jerry Mitchell.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard him talk about why he has smooth grips on his revolvers?
I've seen it like on YouTube, him talking about it.
Yeah, he talks about having those smooth grips because if you get a bad purchase on your grip, you're stuck with it if it's really grippy. Whereas when it says smooth, like you said, can I make that adjustment on the fly and do what I need to do with what I've been given? Like, can I just make it, and then being like if you're driving a Glock or, one of the 1911 style pistols where you have that more grippy texture, you need to have enough of those exposures where you come out and it's not the greatest grip, but you still know how to make it work. You still know how to like make the hits and keep the hit factor where it needs to be good.
Either I can shift my hands on the grip, or I'm going to change the grip pressures a little bit with the support hand or with the shooting hand to compensate for the angle being slightly off,
Yes. Yeah.
And if you don't get enough looks at it that are varied,
yes,
you're not going to be able to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Right.
Yeah, and this is a cool concept, man. I like this.
Yeah.
I'm going to do some running with this.
Nice. Yeah. I'm interested to see where you take it, man. It's such a cool thought process and approach to training yourself and others, and just, what is the best way to put it? Like, how do I go from effective to efficient without losing sight of what I'm trying to do? If we get too pretty, if we get too efficient, where it's just this wonderful masterpiece, but now you've lost like time, you've lost speed, you've lost all these other things.
Or adaptability. You've lost the adaptability because now it's pigeonholed into this. It's the Mawashi Gary from Shotokan, and your knee has to be here, and your foot has to be up the same height as the hip.
Yeah.
It's got to come like it's going over the chair. It's got to take exactly that line.
Right.
But none of the great Shotokan fighters throw it that way all the time either. They'll throw it like up on an angle. They'll throw it over the top and cutting down because it's effective. It's not meant to be this picture that can't change, right? Yeah. It's not framed in the shadow box hanging on the wall. It's in the toolbox, with a sweaty grip, and it's got rust and it's scratched up and it's getting banged up.
Yeah, it's this living thing, right? That just every time it evolves just a little bit to survive a little longer in that environment, right? And once we start looking at it that way, that makes it easier to accept the not as pretty parts. Because if we look at like the Russians did a study, Bernstein's hammer, right? This guy, like Bernstein, did a study on who are the best blacksmiths. Like, if we could just train all the young guys, all the apprentices to swing a hammer like these guys, we got it. We will become super productive. Well, what they discovered was it's never the same twice. It never follows the same path. They slow motion video, filming and all the lights. It's pretty cool if you look it up, like the pictures and stuff. And it's just never the same twice. It's never the same. But what is the same is how they hit. They're adapting mid-flight. They're changing things mid-flight on that hammer to hit exactly where they want it to hit. And so, again, that puts us back into that same spot of, I just need to work on being effective. I need to accept that there will be some slop. I need to accept there's going to be some misses. I need to accept that there's going to be some failures on my way to discovering what works repeatedly. And then also accepting that it's going to be different every single time. It's never going to be the same. Just like in that study, they discovered the metal doesn't always respond the same, which causes the hammer to have to change mid-flight. And what they needed was more of the ability to train the ability for the blacksmith to see and make those adjustments rather than just try to be this robot,
That perceptual and cognitive adaptation.
Yes. Yeah, at that high level. And it's fascinating. It's it's one of those things that can drive you crazy thinking about it and how to create an environment where students and yourself can be put in this environment where you just see hundreds of looks, hundreds of exposures so that you can grow at the fastest rate possible.
I had an interesting observation in my dry fire session this morning that I think is related to this, and I didn't realize it when I observed it. Right.
Yeah.
Because I try to be very like whenever I'm practicing something like that, whether it's hitting the heavy bag or like I've been kind of getting a little bit into FMA again lately, and doing some stuff with the sticks.
Yeah.
I try to be real, and I know it's a buzzword, but I try to be real, like mindful, right? Like not be judgmental, but just see what happens and really observe it in as much detail as I can, and let my subconscious kind of figure out how to make it that desired end state without me interfering too much,
Mm-hmm.
So I was using that virtual reality trainer I've been using for my shooting, that Ace VR. You got to try it, man. It is phenomenal.
Yeah.
Right? It's amazing.
I got to try that, man. I see it. I'm like, oh, man.
So there's a drill in there, and it's actually like a Max Michel and Mike Seeklander drill, right? And they call it Transition Hell. And it's 2 open targets on a 45-degree angle at 7 yards and a plate rack at like 15. And the idea is you shoot the left paper with 2, the leftmost plate, the right paper with 2, the rightmost plate, and you repeat until all the plates are down.
Oh, nice.
It's a great drill, right?
Yeah.
And lately, and I was really seeing it this morning, like I was really seeing it, I was shooting, not at my PR speed, because that's like, the ragged edge, but pretty close to it.
Yeah.
And I was really seeing all these subtle corrections in my dot on the plates at the end of the transitions that I wasn't consciously making.
Oh, nice.
So I would see the dot come in and be just a little bit too far, and it would like come back as I was pulling the trigger.
Oh,
I would come in and I'd be prepping the trigger a little too soon, and then all of a sudden the dot would just kind of jerk to the right, so it was on the plate.
Oh, nice.
And it wasn't something I was thinking about. It just seemed to kind of be happening. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And obviously the goal would be to make that happen all the time, which I'm not saying I can do.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think that kind of ties into what we're talking about, right? That ability to make those corrections on the fly without
Yes.
the conscious mind.
Yes.
Just having the subconscious just make these little fine adjustments to your technique that may not fit the mold of the pretty Mawashi-geri like we talked about earlier,
Yeah.
but make it effective, right?
Yeah.
You know, because obviously it's better if I don't over transition and have to come back. But if
Right.
I can come back from a minor over transition during the trigger press, what time have I lost?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
You know, very, very minimal, right? It's better than a miss. you
Yeah.
know?
Exactly. Because you couldn't press the trigger anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, you could, but you're going to get a miss.
Yeah. So
Time.
it was just really fascinating to me. Like I spent some extra time on the drill just because I was geeking out on what I was seeing, you know?
Nice. Yeah. That's way cool.
And
Yeah,
this
and you get that
conversation
close to
kind of
it, too.
is making me really think about it because I think it ties into what we're talking about, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
You know, so the more looks I've gotten at that particular drill and the transition, the more I'm able to kind of play jazz with it, come off the melody.
Yeah. 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 And just kind of improvise and hit that flow state. You know,
Yeah.
they say to reliably hit a flow state, you know, we need three things, right? We need a goal that's just outside our reach. It's attainable, but maybe not. What are the other things? We need a time constraint. I'm spacing on the third one, but there's three pieces, and it's one of those things where, and oh man, what is it? So time constraint, just outside our reach. There's a third piece. It'll come to me, but
I can't think of it now either. I'll have to go Google it.
yeah, it's those things that create that flow state, and it's kind of like what you're talking about, where you're just in this groove and you're just doing these things, and you're observing what's happening, but
Yeah.
you're so in it. And it's got this constraint, you know, and it's maybe just outside your reach, but you're pushing for it, that it forces, like you said, you're not running at your PR speed, but you're moving fast enough that you could fail.
Oh
know,
yeah,
and
it definitely was not it wasn't a comfortable, easy pace. It was
so it forces you into that space, that flow state, like really, and it sounds like you were there, like you're in that flow state where you're just observing. It's happening, and you're just observing, and you know who's really good at this is CrossFit. They're really good. They're really good at, like, here's a hard thing we're going to do. Let's pick, say, Fran. Here's a hard, workout. We're going to do this workout 4 times with a group, and people will tell you all the time, like, man, I didn't even know, but the time was up. I just was in the groove. I don't even know. I lost track of time. I lost track of numbers. I just was going, And so that's really cool to like start to see that. Not that you are just starting to see that, but when you have students start to see that in their shooting or in their jiu-jitsu or whatever it is that they're doing, where they're tapping into that flow state, and that creativity starts to come out, where it's like, how do I solve this problem with as much of the artistic side of it, the creative side, rather than just getting angry and
and like I'm convinced that especially like the first couple times somebody gets that state of mind, and I wish I could do it all the time because I can't, you know what I mean, but I'm trying to get more consistent with it as I get older and wiser. But like the first time somebody does it, you can see it on their face. Like all of a sudden, like that look of strain just kind of goes away, and it's just like this look of like, oh wow, what's happening? Well, this is kind of cool. I'm gonna watch this for a while.
Oh yeah. It's like the first, and right? It's like the first time you run a dot gun, whether it's a rifle or a pistol. First time you run a dot gun, and you get to the end of it all, and you realize that you never looked at the sight. You looked at the target, and you just like a video screen. For me, this is what happened. It was up at the North Chicago FBI range, and with the Barnhart Performance guys, and I just remember getting to the end of the run and being like, oh, I don't remember pulling my vision back to the sight system one time, even though it was all kinds of just different distances and obstacles and all these things. And the instructor there, this guy named Don, he says, hey, so what did you see? And I said, I felt like I was watching a video of targets I felt like it was a video game. I felt like I was watching a video where this, we use the EOTechs, right? So like the reticle, the round with the dot, I just felt like I'm watching a video and I'm just seeing at a distance this sight appear, this red dot appear on this video this screen I'm watching, and I'm not seeing it here. I'm seeing it out here, like I'm watching. And so, yeah, right. Like it's those kind of moments where it's like, oh, that's what they're talking about.
And like in one respect, I don't think any of this is new, right? I mean, you hear things like Mushin, and all the stuff for centuries, right?
Yeah.
But like you said about training earlier, we want every generation to be able to kind of stand on the shoulders of the ones that went before.
Yes.
And I think all this research that's been done lately into training for mastery and training for excellence and achieving these mental states, like that's kind of what I would like, is to be able to find a shortcut for people to find that early on in their training.
Yeah.
Because it takes people so long usually to start experiencing that with any sort of reliability, unless they're gifted. Like I think that's one of the things, in my own personal opinion, and this is just theoretical, like I have no hard evidence, right? I have no scientific study to back it up on. But I think the trait of having a natural predisposition to finding that mental state is probably the most important trait that makes somebody a gifted natural athlete.
Yes, I do. I agree. One of the
physical attributes can be trained.
Yeah, that's the easy part.
Yeah,
that's the easy part, right? Getting that mindset that Dr. Carolyn Dweck wrote about in the book Mindset, right?
Yeah,
that growth mindset. Getting people to have that piece, man. If I could hand that to somebody now and just say, start here, start with this mindset. Doesn't matter what you do. I don't care if you're going to bake cookies. I don't care. You're going to learn how to shoot. You're going to whatever. It doesn't matter. But if you had this mindset and you take this into whatever the endeavor is, you will excel at 10 times the pace I did. You're going to grow so fast compared to how I grew just because I was too stubborn to quit. You're going to grow because you're going to love the challenge of solving this puzzle. Like a kid, you hand a box of Legos to a kid and say, here's what it's supposed to look like. And they just fall in love with the process of like, how do I create that? How do I reach that? So you hand that mindset to somebody who's a little older, and it's amazing what happens when they, again, back to what we were talking about with the game, when they realize this is just a game. I can't tell somebody not to be frustrated when they get stuck in a bad position and they're getting held down and submitted. But what I can tell them is like, be excited by the opportunity to solve the problem. Like how can, rather than having the attitude of, I want to stay away from that. Like, I don't want to ever get caught in that again. How about the attitude of like, I want to get put in that position repeatedly so I can figure out how to not get submitted there, how to escape, and then let's back it up a couple steps to how do I never get there, but not because of fear, meaning I totally avoid it, but how do I never get there because I see it coming, because I've put myself there so many times. I know absolutely what you're about to do to me when this starts to happen. Kind of that predictive thing, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a valuable training paradigm that I think a lot of people neglect too.
Yeah.
Avoiding the things that are difficult for them.
Yeah.
Like I remember, I think you caught me doing this a few times when I would come out to your training classes at your gym.
Yeah.
I'd intentionally I'd tell Les, okay, do this to me so I can try to get out of it. Put myself in a bad spot and then let him get the advantage. Let him get me pinned. Let him get me, and then and then okay, now what do I do?
Yeah, like how do I figure out how to get out of this? Yeah, I thought about this when we were talking about the moving at the edge of like, how do I create that peak experience for trainees and people I'm working with? So my wife Jill, she's a newer shooter. She's been shooting for about 3 years, competing in IDPA for I think 1 season, and we did a drill, and I don't know who I got this from. So I wish I knew. I think maybe Matt Burkett, but I'm not 100% sure. But it's just, you take a metronome, right? And I know you've heard of this one.
Yeah.
You take the metronome and a transition on the metronome. So you have to transition. You can't stop, make everything perfect because it's going to beep again. So you have to be on the other one. Every time it beeps, you have to press the trigger. And we got a plate rack, and it started on the outside left, outside right, and then work our way into the center on the beeps with the metronome. And we set it so I had her just run this at as fast as you can. Just do it as fast as you can and get hits. And then we set the metronome to just be a couple beats faster. And she started doing it.
Yeah.
Because she didn't have time to think. She just had to make it happen. And it was interesting, man. And I think you'll dig this. We were driving home from the range, and she said, I feel like I'm in, like, you know, those old science fiction movies where the plane goes warp speed or whatever, the spaceship. She goes, I felt like that was happening. Like everything was going past me faster than I could process. And I was just watching the gun in the air go back and forth, and the plates are going down. Like I'm seeing it all happen, but I didn't know I could see that fast until we did this drill. And I'm like, that's so cool. I wish I could have. Yeah.
And that's the key, right? Like that's it right there.
Yeah.
You know, and like if you could figure out a way to impart the ability to create a flow state in someone as a kid.
Yeah.
And have them not lose it, have them hang on to it as they got older.
Yeah.
There's nothing that kid couldn't learn as he got older.
Yeah, they'd be unstoppable. Because they would know, like, this is the formula. This is what I need to do. This is the feeling I need to have as I solve this problem. And they would look for it. They would look for ways to create that and then solve the problem, you know.
And like I said, I think a lot of the natural high performers, the guys that just seem to pick up anything well and like just do it really well, I think they've probably got a high natural affinity for that mental state.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I agree. I feel like a lot of those guys, they don't know how they do it, but they do it.
Yeah.
You know, they can't explain it. You know, they can't break it down, but they just do it. They just know they do it, you know. So it's so fascinating, man. It's such a cool.
I love all this stuff. I could geek out in this stuff for hours.
Yeah,
we kind of already have, but I mean, I could keep geeking out on it for hours.
Right. It's awesome, man. But
so before we wrap up, because we've already gone, we're just about coming up on an hour. I think we started about 10 after, didn't we? Because we had a little bit of technical issues in the beginning.
Yeah.
So let's tell everybody like what you're up to now, because I know you're doing like online coaching and stuff too, right? Like what do you have going on with that?
Yeah. So basically what happened was I just started thinking again, that whole examination and elimination. You know, I started thinking like what makes me the happiest? What do I do that just like brings joy, just fills your heart, you know, like what is that? And what I realized was it was helping people figure out how to transform themselves, helping people figure out how to solve their problems, regardless of what that is. So that led me into that space of the transformative coaching or transformation coaching of how do I work with people who are struggling with various things. You know, I have people that I'm working with that struggling with drinking to the point that they've had multiple DUIs. They lost their license, you know, maybe did a little bit of jail time because of that. Drugs, you know, opiates are such a thing, man. And then also just people that are like, hey, man, I want to lose 15 pounds and not hate myself right now. I just feel I look in the mirror and I can't stand what I see and I just don't feel good. And I realized that that's what made me happy, you know, was helping people fix that piece. And so that led me into kind of the online coaching and because it's just, you can reach so many more people. You know, I can work with somebody in Canada or someone in, you know, Czechoslovakia, you know, and whereas I could never do that in person, you know, it just is the distance. So that's where I've been. So that's what I've moved into over the last 3 years. So coming out of COVID, really COVID opened the door for that. Actually, COVID,
because everybody was communicating online instead of in person.
Yeah. it shut everything down. And I remember I was part of Alex Hormosi's group, which was called Gym Launch. And we had this meeting, and once a week we would have a Zoom call with him and a bunch of other gym owners in our group. And I remember just thinking, what am I going to do? Like, they're shutting me down. You can't teach classes. You can't do anything. What am I going to do? And he said, listen, guys, nothing's permanent. This isn't going to last forever. It's impossible for this to last forever. But in the meantime, what if you could coach people the same way you do in person? You just do it over Zoom, man. It's just, you just have to just figure it out. And back to the exposures, right? Just do it. It's going to be terrible before it's not terrible, And
God. When I decided to start doing this little fledgling podcast of mine, like, I'm looking back at the first couple episodes, the complete lack of any sort of production value.
Yeah.
Like,
right.
Horrible.
But, you're like, oh man. But that was the thing. And so that just led me to from COVID until now, 2020, 2021. And it's just been growing ever since. And so, that's what I do now. That's one of my primary gigs, is just coaching folks online.
So if somebody wants to be a client, how do they find you?
Yeah, just reach out to me. So it's paulsharpcoaching.com is the easy way. Or a lot of people reach me through social media. It's all Paul Sharp Coaching on Instagram and all the different social medias out there. And they just reach out to me and we just get to work. We have a quick phone call, figure out what their goals are, and we get after it. And it's been immensely satisfying, to have people that are like, man, I've lost 50 pounds, I've stopped drinking, or whatever it is that they were struggling with. Just having people just be like, man, this has changed my life.
And do you do any online coaching for like BJJ or anything like that as well, or do you kind of keep that separate with your straight blast stuff?
Yeah, I keep that separate. I do some online coaching for that kind of stuff, but as part of the package. So
Gotcha.
I'll have a guy come in. He's like, hey, I want to work with you on this thing I need to fix about myself, but also I want to do some stuff with the combative side or jiu-jitsu side. So I'm like, yeah, absolutely, man. So kind of mixes it all. It ends up kind of all mixing in, over time. But the main focus is just helping people transform themselves and get back to who they're supposed to be, man. Because that's all it is. It's just life. You know this, man. Being a cop, you see so many abnormal situations, and then you're expected to act like it's normal. Right? Like, let me just act like I'm not completely, just knocked off my blocks by what I just saw, and,
I saw a statistic the other day where it was like the average person sees 8 or less traumatic incidents in their lifetime.
Yeah.
That's like a Tuesday.
Yeah. That's just a day. Right. And so, we're expected to go into situations where you just saw somebody do the most, to us, heinous act to their loved one, their kid or their spouse or whatever. And we're supposed to act like, oh, yeah, okay, no problem. Let me just get the facts, who, what, when, why, where, and how. And let me call the state's attorney or whatever I got to do to see what we're going to do to charge this up or not charge it up. And I'm supposed to act like that's normal when I've never seen anything like that in my life,
and never thought you would. Like, some of the times you see stuff and you're like, I can't believe I just saw that. Like, I can't believe somebody actually does that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm with you, man.
I remember on my FTO, not to get too far into like war stories and stuff, but on my FTO, I'm brand new, FTOs, right? Just, on a shooting scene, back in this apartment complex. I'm trying to not be in the way, but we're going to take the paper because FTO. And I remember having this little kid, it's like 2 a.m, 3 a.m, this little kid in diapers holding a shell casing, like handing it to me. Yeah. And I just remember going like, this is the most bizarre moment of my life. I have never in a million years thought I would experience this. And yeah, and it was just, it's one of those things where you're like, well, now I have to, like you said, right? It's Tuesday,
Yeah.
Let's write the report, turn it over to the dicks. They're going to do the investigation, and we're going to clear and go to the next thing. And
I think that, like, I think too many LEOs don't, and this is even more important if you don't have like a really broad and deep support system, right?
Yeah.
Like when I moved to Chicago to be a cop, I didn't have any relatives in Chicago. I just moved there for the action. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that one of the things that helped me not fall into that cynicism and bitterness and apathy trap that so many guys fall into was that I had stuff like martial arts to train, and I had things that I was like, if you have something away from the job you can kind of put yourself into and try to get better at, and
absolutely,
and polish yourself with, because I really like, going back to the whole focus of training and how it affects your life. Like, I'm a big believer that training to be the best version of you can be is the meaning of life. I think it's what makes us feel comfortable with ourselves, makes us feel self-satisfied and confident and happy with and at peace with ourselves. Absolutely. And I'm not saying it means you never make mistakes or that things don't get bad, but being at peace with who you are.
Yeah. And quickly, and to that point of like, you are still human. You are still going to make mistakes. You're still going to screw up, but the ability to bounce back quickly, the ability to course correct quickly, right? And that's it, man. Like, I never thought that having those experiences would help me help others, but that's what this is. The whole coaching thing, it's just helping people just deal with stuff. Not that I'm not a counselor by any means, but it's just, listen, having these pursuits, having these rituals, having these habits and these standards for yourself will help you get on track in this area of your life, which will, like you said, right, bleed into everything else. Like, you will be able to see these things. You will be able to have these stressful moments, but it will not destroy you. You will be able to go, man, that was tough, but I got to get back on the saddle. I got to get back into it and be who I'm supposed to be for myself first, and then for my people. And so, yeah.
And not to knock professional counselors, right? Because I'm not saying there's not value there, because there is, and there should be some processing involved when you've had careers like you've had, or like the two careers I had. You know what I mean? There needs to be some processing involved, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's no shame in that. It doesn't make you weak. It's just, it's something you should do. You should absolutely do it.
You got to do it.
Whether it's with a peer group or with somebody else. So it's not that I'm saying counseling isn't valuable, but if just talking about your feelings could make you okay, then people would be okay a lot easier.
Yeah, exactly. There's and has to happen.
Yeah. And I think that that's the side of things you're talking about. And I think that's got a huge amount. It's just as important, I think.
Yeah, that's it.
It's not enough to just talk about it. You've got to actually do something. You got to take action. What is the actionable step? What can I do to make myself feel better about myself?
Yeah. What is the thing I can do right now to make it so that, like, when I have a client say, look, one client, and obviously confidentiality, right? So, but they're like, I turned around just in time to see my spouse make this face that I knew they were looking at me with disgust. And I never want to feel that again. I'm like, I got you, bro. I got you. Right. Yeah. We're going to rebuild you. We will build you into the hero of your story. Like, it's what I do for myself, what I'm going to do for you. Like, I don't want you to ever feel that again. Whatever happens with your relationship, if it's gone, it's gone. God forbid, but sometimes that happens. But you moving forward, you have to know that will never happen again. You will never be in a space where you look at somebody and they don't look at you with respect. They don't look at you and go, that dude's a savage. I don't know much else about him, but he looks like a savage. And you're going to know you're a savage because every freaking morning you're getting up and running, lifting weights, reading, meditating, doing your reflection, all those things that make a warrior. The history of fighters, right? Like, if you look at all of them, that's the exact path they all did. So I just act as a guide in that path.
Well, for everybody out there listening, if you're in the market for something like that, I can't recommend Paul highly enough. I've known you for a long time now, and you're solid with this stuff. So you'd definitely be the right choice for people looking for that.
Thank you, bro. I appreciate it.
But I really enjoyed this, man. It's been too long since we caught up.
Yeah, man. Let's do it. I got to get down to Texas.
Oh, dude, you're always welcome. I now live in the barbecue capital of Texas, and we got plenty of room. Perfect. So it won't be vegan. It's not really strictly carnivore because of the sauce. But if you can make allowances, come on down and we'll get some junk calories in. Heck
yeah, man. Let's do it.
All right, man. Well, everybody out there, I hope you enjoyed this conversation, this episode as much as I did. And I will talk to everybody next time.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Way is in Training. Please come back again as we explore how training makes us better at our craft and better in our everyday lives. See all of you soon.